Hello and welcome back to another Monster Monday, a series where I draw a creature from D&D and I talk about its lore and its history and what it's like to fight in-game as well. And these videos are based on your suggestions, the monsters that you'd like to see and hear me talk about, like to see me draw and see my interpretation of as an artist. And today's was no different. Today's suggestion of Cloakers was first suggested by Eisenbleach or Eisenbleach, A-I-Z-E-N. Anyway, however you pronounce that, Eisen. I hope that's okay. And Eisen's suggestion was voted on by my patrons to be this week's Monster Monday. So if you have a monster that you're desperate to see me draw or hear me talk about the lore and mythology of, make sure to leave that down below in the comment section, because I take every single one of your suggestions no matter what, and then I put them in my to-draw list and I hand that over to my patrons every month, who get an equal vote to decide which monsters come up when. So as well, if you want a bit more control over the videos that you see from me, and when I get round to your monster suggestions, then I'll make sure to leave a link to my Patreon page down in my description box, so that you can join in on the voting process if you'd like to. But in the meantime, it's definitely time to start today's video on Cloakers. So take a seat, grab a cup of tea, and let's get started. So before I begin diving into the lore of these creatures, I really wanted to say a huge thank you, Joe Gilday, a very good friend of mine, who has stepped up in a rather fierce way. The COVID-19 lockdown has definitely affected everybody. Some of you will have lost loved ones, some of you may have contracted the disease yourself, and I sort of figured myself largely to be immune to the effects of isolation. Not to the disease itself, obviously, but I spend a lot of time indoors, have the luxury of working from home a lot of the time. All of my entertainment is sort of video game based, or I do a lot of miniature painting. I have all of my hobbies indoors. I get to spend more time with my wife. All of these things sound like a wonderful luxury, but I found myself recently struck a huge sense of apathy. The drive and motivation to research Monster Mondays completely fell away. There's a huge amount of work that goes into researching every single one of these. I mean, it usually takes me about a week per episode, just research them properly, and just having the energy to do that was pretty non-existent. So Joe has stepped up and very kindly asked if he could do the research on my behalf. So today's episode, and a few of the ones in future, have actually been researched by my good friend Joe, so you have him to thank for the fact that we have some extra Monster Mondays stockpiled and ready to go for you guys. So thank you so much, Joe. You are an absolute gift of a friend, as a member of my D&D party, and to the Arcane Forge community. Thank you for your help. Now, I actually started researching before Joe had gotten into the nitty-gritty, and I'm glad he did, because my first note says that these monsters first appeared in 1983's Monster Manual 2 for first edition, but Joe has dug a little bit deeper and found out that apparently Cloakers first appeared in 1981's Secret of the Slaver's Stockade module by Harold Johnson and Tom Mulvey. And they have changed their appearance an awful lot. This is one of the creatures that I've been most desperate to illustrate and do my own interpretation of. Thankfully, you guys have voted for quite a lot of the monsters that I've been desperate to redesign recently, but Cloakers have been very high on my list, because for me, they are some of the most unfortunately designed creatures in D&D's history, despite how useful and interesting, how cool they could be. For those of you who don't know what a Cloaker actually is, they're an 8-foot wide, manta ray-like aberration with fleshy, leathery wings and a long spined tail. In modern renditions, this seems to manifest with a weirdly sort of ripped body in the middle of essentially a fleshy kite with a super defined six-pack and tiny little noodly hooked arms around where their ears would be, with a bulbous, sort of toothy, fleshy, skull-like, noseless head in the front, and earlier editions have been even stranger. First edition's initial sort of rendition looked like a pretty creepy, stretched, ghostly face in the middle of a stingray. It looked quite alien to me, and I kind of liked it. But in second edition, oh boy, whoever illustrated this, in my opinion, phoned it in quite badly, drawing basically a paper-thin blanket with an anthropomorphic cartoon devil head glued to the very center, with two little tiny hamster hands at the edge. Now, I'll try and show an image of this as I talk about it, because no description I make could truly inform you guys how misguided this illustration may very well be. Personally, as you'll see throughout this, I really like the idea of manta rays. I think they're glorious, beautiful creatures. They have quite an imposing shadow, an imposing silhouette, and for an aberration I think they seem perfect, so I'm definitely going to use a lot more inspiration from manta rays going forward, and I definitely don't think I'll be doing a little opposable head in the centre of this thing's chest. In The Secret of Slaver's Stockade, they appeared as, quote, rare and exotic creatures that typically live far underground. They're shadow-dwelling, unearthly creatures that are normally only encountered in deep, dark caverns far beneath the earth. In terms of what they're actually designed to be, what they're supposed to be used for, they're another one of these creatures like mimics or ropers, things like that, where they are designed to deceive players. Back in the golden age of D&D, way back in the day, when adventurers would be constantly travelling through dark caverns, bumping into random objects, being set upon by stealthy creatures. These creatures were another very, very evil trap monster. They have a sort of false appearance about them, hence their name, where when they lie motionless, they are said to be indistinguishable in appearance from a dark leather cloak. So treasure-hungry adventurers might try one on, wrapping it around them, and it's here that a cloaker would strike. Now, it's easy to say that essentially a cloaker would then have someone grappled. They could stab away to their heart's content with their barbed, spiky tails, or choke someone with their tiny little hands that fasten like a clasp around someone's neck. But for me, the interest in these creatures comes they're intelligent. They are highly intelligent evil manta rays. In Slavers of the Stockade, they refer to themselves as the Tenebra Complexor rather than Cloakers, being a colloquialism or a colloquialism rather than just being a simple trap. So highly intelligent that they have built their own city, Ikemu, a vertical city befitting flying creatures, built into tall pillars that droop like stalagmites and stalactites from both the bottom of cave systems and their ceilings, where these creatures dwell and cohabit with other civilizations. They are known to exploit, apparently, trade links in the Underdark and the Shadowfell, where they know perhaps drow or illithids might go, carrying valuable goods, and descend upon them, stealing from them, or perhaps dealing with them. As I say, they are very intelligent creatures, perfectly able to communicate with each other. The level of technology in Ikemu is unclear, but as challenge rating 8, intelligence 13 creatures, they are very similar in intelligence to humankind. There's no reason why there couldn't be an absolutely human-level civilization thriving in the Underdark, built by these strange creatures, and how bizarre that city must look, all built with these tiny little hands. Something which I capitalise on in this drawing, giving them slightly larger, boned arms in the middle of their wing, although I kind of presume that those maybe would be the things that they walk on to walk on land. And the front appendages attached to their eye stalks there would be kind of more their articulated hand-like. Either way, I'd just be intrigued to see what these creatures would come up with, what their civilization and technology would look like with such a strange and aberrant physiology. We'll likely never know, because it's said that their city is now under the possession of the Shadar Kai, although the temples to the ancient gods they once worshipped are still said to reside there. Either way, they're highly intelligent creatures is the point that I wanted to get across. So rather than being a simple trap monster, a deceptive looking, inviting, perhaps fleshy cloak that an adventurer might pick up, wrap around themselves that they've just found treasure and then realise they're being stabbed to death by a cloaker. Personally, I imagine it could go another way, where this is the opportunity for the cloaker to start making bargains and deals with their helpless victim. They have two very, very sharp claws around someone's neck, like a little clasp, and they have their long barbed tail, which could easily protrude between their legs and go for a strike through the heart. Unfortunate, hapless adventurer is now fully willing to listen and deal with this intelligent creature. Maybe they're held hostage, and the rest of the group have to surrender their interesting weapon, jewels and gold, and the cloaker will happily leave them be. Although as chaotic neutral creatures, we don't know that they're going to honour their bargains and deals. We do know that they're not necessarily evil, could be persuaded by coin. Now, manta rays are actually a relative of sharks, which means one of the many ways in which they communicate is, or rather detect things in the deep of the ocean, just like sharks, are through these very sensitive fluid tubules, or rather fluid-containing tubules, which detect vibrations in electrical currents. And interestingly, this is reflected in-game through the cloaker as well. Although they can speak deep speech and undercommon, perhaps even common as well, they're intelligent enough to learn other languages, so why not? One of the main ways in which they communicate with one another is through this kind of moan. It's called a moan, and this is reflected in one of the actions that they can actually take, along with a multi-attack including a bite, a tail slash, and a few other things. This moan can frighten all creatures who fail a wisdom saving throw when they hear it. But in my head, I kind of picture this as something like a deep shockwave of vibration, something on the audible spectrum which is not familiar to humans, but can still encroach on our awareness. There's a great deal of research into the idea that a lot of paranormal sort of like ghost sightings and things like that are the result of very, very low frequency sound waves in huge abundance. For example, machinery is supposed to make a lot of these kind of vibrations, and there's a huge amount of ghost sightings in the London Underground where these sound waves are in abundance. And it kind of made me think that perhaps this moan is at such a low frequency and resonates in so many ways that are too complex for us to understand. Perhaps they are a beautiful canvas, a beautiful painting of sounds to another cloaker who would understand what these messages mean. But humans who can't discern through these and don't have that kind of range of hearing, they would just feel these vibrations, and perhaps that is why they experience fear. Now, I talked about these fluid-filled tubes that sharks have called spiracles in a few of my other Monster Mondays. I think perhaps in the Boulet video, and almost certainly in the Sahuagin video. So I won't bludgeon you over the head with these details, I won't go over them too much. But essentially they're just very like the fluid-filled canals in our ears that detect whether or not we are facing upright or in some other capacity. They're really adept at sensing vibration. So perhaps these vibrations, this sound, this moan, is not designed for us to hear, but if we could feel vibration, maybe we would have a beautiful image before us, painted on our occipital lobes, that communicates the breadth of an idea. Maybe any creature that has tremor sense might be able to understand what this creature is trying to get across when they unleash this moan. But seeing as it's a main action and it's designed to frighten people, maybe they are just saying something terrifying and we wouldn't really want to hear it. Now, I've mentioned that these things can stab you, maybe hold you hostage and all this kind of stuff, but their actual attacks as a challenge rating 8 creature are fairly ferocious. They have a multi-attack, one of which is with a bite and one of which is with their tail attack. Their tail attack is pretty self-explanatory. It's a 1d8 plus 3 slashing damage attack, which I would have thought would be piercing damage, but in the original illustrations they have more of these kind of, I suppose, like razors on either side. Personally, I'd go with a piercing damage attack, but that's just my personal preference. And Joe and I also talked about the idea of whether or not these things would have some kind of venom in their tail, like a bee sting or something. Perhaps a variant of these creatures, maybe like a specialized version, a cloaker overseer perhaps. And initially I thought that wouldn't quite work because manta rays and things like that, as I say, as relations of sharks, don't actually have any venom in their tails. They don't have a sting, but their long, sharp tails are just a stabbing implement, I guess. Something to ward off enemies rather than to hunt down prey because they're filter feeders. But they're intelligent enough to be able to coat their tails in venom if they wanted to. So like a rogue, maybe some of the more industrious, some of the more sly, some of the more devious, assassin-like cloakers might take the time to coat their tails in some kind of poison, or maybe in this strange civilization they even have weapons that they actually dress their tails in that have venom pockets within them. I'm kind of thinking of those. Do you remember those like weird rings that all the goths used to wear in the early 90s that were like occupied an entire finger and looked like the finger off of a gauntlet? Maybe they have like this kind of reticulated pieces of metal that run down their tail, ending in a point. But anyway, I'm getting off topic. The other part of their multi-attack is their bite, which on the face of it is just a 2d6 plus 3 piercing damage thing. But if the target is large or smaller, the cloaker attaches itself to this creature. And if the cloaker has advantage against the target, i.e. if it's been staying completely motionless, or if someone has decided to wear it like a cloak, then it would definitely have advantage for the surprise attack. Then the cloaker attaches itself to the target's head, causing the target to be blinded and unable to breathe while the cloak is attached. And it can continue to chew this target over and over again for as long as it's attached. Although you are able to tear this creature off of your ally's head with a successful strength check, but I imagine this would rend a lot of skin from the head of this poor unsuspecting victim. Interestingly enough, we're told that the cloaker also has a special ability called damage transfer, that while it's wrapped around somebody, it can choose to reduce the damage that it takes by half and transfer that to whoever it is latched onto as well. Finally, they have a one-use ability. They have something that recharges after a short or long rest, called Phantasms, which I'll read for you. It says the cloaker magically creates illusory duplicates of itself if it isn't in bright light. The duplicates move with it and mimic its actions, shifting position so as to make it impossible to track which cloaker is the real one. If the cloaker is ever in an area of bright light, the duplicates disappear. Whenever any creature targets the cloaker with an attack or harmful spell, while a duplicate remains, that creature rolls randomly to determine whether it targets the cloaker or one of its duplicates. So essentially it gets a free mirror image Now, obviously these guys could be spellcasters because they are, well, I mean, they're aberrations for a start, but also they're intelligent enough to learn spellcraft. However, in my own headcanon, I kind of imagine this is another vibrational frequency thing. Maybe they unleash a moan of such a devastatingly low frequency that it causes the liquid, the gelling creature's eyes to vibrate. Maybe everything around them seems to vibrate and duplicate. You know, like when someone is waking up from a severe hit on the head, people are asked, how many fingers am I holding up? They don't know the right answer. Their vision could be heavily distorted. They could be concussed, something like that. Maybe this is something the Cloaker can produce as well, this deep resonating frequency that causes it to distort people's vision. That might be a little bit complicated to enforce, but I really like the idea of it. And obviously this would be so draining to the Cloaker to manifest that that's why I can only do it once every now and again. Similarly, you could just explain this away by saying, you know, bards sing magic into existence, so why can't a phantasm unleash this deep vibration, this resonance, and tap into the same magic that a bard can? Now, I personally love the idea of these creatures. I really hate the way they look in the monster manual and have looked in the past. They were in need of a redesign and I'm really pleased with the way that I came up with these guys. But one other detail that Joe mentioned that I hadn't really thought of actually was that as a cloak-based creature, where are they looking? In the original design, they have this little head that rests underneath their body, this little skull-like face. That would mean they were kind of fairly persistently looking downwards. We discussed the idea that, as an aberration, it doesn't really matter how many eyes they have, so I decided to put a third one on top of their head, so that even when they were cloaked, they could see behind them and things like that, even when they were being worn by someone. And that also adds to the fact that these guys are immensely light sensitive. They live entirely in the darkness, and so just like a drow, if they're in direct sunlight, or if they're looking at something that is in direct sunlight, their eyes can't really adjust to it very well, so they get disadvantage on attack rolls and wisdom perception checks that rely on that sight. One thing that I really want to use in my campaigns is to have an allegiance between some villain and a cloaker who perhaps wears one of these creatures as a cloak and has them as their little surprise attack. If they're ever cornered, they have a fully intelligent backup bodyguard on their back who can float around and slash people with its tail. Alternatively, you could very easily have a gang in your campaign, which is run by a cloaker secretly. They have a false figurehead character who is their kind of body double, their stand-in, as it were, within the culture that they're supposed to be in. Maybe like a human guy, appears to be the kingpin of crime, who's always wearing this leathery cape with a long trailing tail that never moves. Your characters assassinate this would-be kingpin, only to find that crime is still going on exactly as normal, because it turns out that the cloaker that he was wearing this whole time was actually the man in charge, who's just wearing a living bodyguard. But there's so much potential for these creatures, and I love the idea that they could build a city, and what that city might look like. Something that has absolutely alien physiology, doesn't even have hands or anything like that. As I say, I kind of drew the little hamster claws here as big arms. Manta rays are known to have a cartilage skeleton, just like sharks do, so I imagine they might be able to walk around on those big limbs. But I love the idea of a city being made out of spires that are entirely vertical, how civilized they might be. It's really fascinating to me. So I was really happy with the design that I came up with here, and I'm really happy with the research that Joe managed to find out about these guys. So thank you so much for joining me for today's Monster Monday. If you enjoyed today's video, please make sure to leave a little like down below, maybe favorite this video, and share it with your DM, or the rest of your party if you fear your DM might be about to unleash a band of cloakers upon you. Everything that you can do like that really helps the channel to grow, so thank you so much for your help. If you'd like to see more videos from me, I release a video every single Monday, and maybe some other ones as well if my schedule allows, so I hope you'll subscribe as well, so that you don't miss any of them. I found out recently that only half of the people who watch my videos are actually subscribed to the channel, so if you really want to do me a huge favour and let YouTube know if I'm doing a good job, then subscribing would be a wonderful way to do that. But anyway, until next time, make sure to always give your cloak a little prod if you find a fresh one in a dungeon. Maybe take it out into direct sunlight before you put it on, just in case it is fleshy, aberrational manta ray in disguise. And happy monster hunting.